Let's unpack Burrell and Morgan's research paradigms. They wrote about this a few decades ago, but you see it still today in a lot of textbooks because it remains a useful way to get a lay of the land in terms of where to locate different types of research and theory. So first, we'll give a little overview of their thinking about the paradigms. We'll talk about the two primary axes that form these paradigms, and then we'll dig into the specifics of each of the four paradigms. In terms of overview, both guys were working in organizational behavior academic departments at the time, so a lot of their view is influenced by the study of organizations. Their book explores how each researcher has a set of assumptions that shapes their approach to research. They say all theories of organizations are based upon a philosophy of science and a theory of society. They outline four paradigms or ways of approaching research. A paradigm simply means a way of looking at something that represents an established standard, a set of related ideas. They write, each set of research assumptions identifies a quite separate social scientific reality. To be located in a particular paradigm is to view the world in a particular way. Burrell and Morgan's four paradigms help us more easily make sense of the type of research we are reading, and they provide a convenient way of locating one's own personal frame of reference. So in other words, whether you're reading research or conducting your own or trying to figure that out, their four paradigms are very helpful. Let's look at the two axes that form the four paradigms. The first is the objective and subjective axis. On the objective side, researchers see the world as an objective reality just waiting to be discovered. On the subjective side, researchers see reality as something that is primarily in our heads, in our subjective experience. The second axis has regulation on one side and radical change on the other. In terms of regulation, researchers that lean this way see the world as a fairly stable place that you can study as a status quo. People that lean toward the radical change end of the spectrum see the world as a place that should be changed for various reasons, oftentimes issues related to some notion of equality. They want to change things to create more equal social arrangements. When we cross these two axes, we get the four research paradigms or four quadrants. On the bottom right, we have the primary or traditional paradigm for lots of social scientific research. Functionalist research and theory looks at the status quo. They study things the way they are currently. As Burrell and Morgan put it, researchers in this area seek to provide essentially rational explanations for social affairs. Functionalists see the world as a concrete or objective reality that's out there just waiting to be discovered through systematic study. These researchers want to uncover or reveal this objective reality to get a better handle on it. They also see the world in terms of regulation. In other words, they believe that the world is relatively stable and organized. Like nature and the way natural scientists approach their work, researchers in this paradigm see human activity as orderly and cohesive. In other words, it's very regulated. Taken together, these two dimensions make the functionalist paradigm a problem-oriented approach concerned to provide practical solutions to practical problems. In terms of the research and theory that fits in this as examples, you see people like Frederick Taylor and Max Weber, who belong to the classical management area of research, fitting neatly in here. They were trying to make organizations more effective. More recently, you see the Lean Six Sigma crowd trying to improve organizations in this quadrant. You see a lot of leadership studies here where people are trying to identify the different types of leaders. This area of research really likes labels and categories like that. In terms of the more interpersonal side of things, you see a lot of personality tests and ways of categorizing people. And remember, they see a very fixed notion of the social world, so even your personality is seen as relatively stable and regulated. In the lower left, we have the interpretive paradigm. They still see the world as regulated. In other words, it's still stable, but they have a subjective view of that social reality. So they're still studying social reality as a status quo, as if it is cohesive and orderly. They still want to understand human activity as it is, but they want to view it at the level of the subjective experience of each individual person rather than an overall objective reality. They want to view things and make sense of our social world in terms of our individual realm realm of consciousness as an ongoing process. So social reality to them is best understood from the point of view of each person. Reality is not out there objectively waiting to be discovered. Reality is in our subjective perceptions that are collectively shared to some extent. So from their standpoint, social reality is viewed as a network of individuals' assumptions and an intersubjectively shared meaning. Not surprisingly, research examples in this area are trying to get inside our heads. That's why when you see researchers looking at, let's say, an organization's culture or a community's culture, a lot of times they're stepping into that culture as a participant observer. So they're trying to experience the culture of an organization for themselves. Researchers want to become part of it so they can think and feel and act like an insider to get at that subjective aspect of their experience. It's not surprising then that in terms of methods, you see in-depth interviews to draw out people's thinking and people's perception, as well as that participant aspect of the research where they step into that social reality. In the top left, we have the radical humanists. They still have a subjective view of reality like the interpretive crowd. They see our individual consciousness as being of primary interest. They believe that our thinking or consciousness is dominated by the views of the powerful players in society. In other words, we take on the preferred beliefs, the preferred values and attitudes of the dominant class. And in that way, that kind of thinking subjectively keeps us in subordinate positions in society. And from their view, you can hear the reason why they prefer change, radical change. They're concerned with overthrowing or transcending the limitations of existing social arrangement. These researchers want to release us from the status quo, those dominant and dominating ways of thinking about ourselves and the world. Their goal is emancipation from what they see as an unequal power arrangement that's perpetuated by what our thinking is, what is in our heads. So essentially, they want to free us by freeing our minds. A popular research topic in this quadrant is looking at gender issues, specifically looking at things like language use and how that language represents what is in our thinking. So if you can listen to the way people talk, you get a notion for how they think. And so a lot of times, people in this area are looking at our language use and communication habits that may be reinforcing unhelpful ways of thinking. And in the top right, we have the radical structuralist crowd. They want radical change, like the radical humanists. They want to free people from the status quo, which they see as an unnecessarily dominant, subordinate social arrangement. They differ from the humanists because they see this unequal power arrangement as one primarily caused by and potentially solved by the objective realities in our social structure. Our society, from their view, is organized or structured in ways that make unequal power arrangements much more likely to continue. In terms of the solutions they seek, they want to change laws, to change political policies, to change economic policies, and those dealing with our major social institutions like education, government, and corporations, those concrete social institutions. Examples of research in this area, and let's just stick with the issue of gender. A lot of feminist scholars want to change policies, for example, to pursue equal pay or shape laws about sexism in the workplace. Critical organizational researchers in general want to move away from top-down dominating corporations and move toward more participation-driven models of life at work. And because their objective assumptions are really leaning toward that concrete side of reality, they want to change the way companies are structured. And those are the four paradigms or four quadrants of Burrell and Morgan's schema. This is not the only way to dice up the world of theory and research. There are lots of other helpful and instructive ways, but Burrell and Morgan's remains useful to this day because it's so clear and so easy to apply to our own research and the kinds of research that we may be reading.